Hi, I'm Sam.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is Teens Talk Politics. Today's episode, we are finally in person together, so me and Andrew are now sitting right next to each other. And we shall continue like this. Sadly, we have not ordered our camera yet, nor our professional microphone. So we're still working on some of this stuff. So it could take us a hot minute. So you won't be able to see us right now, but we're still working on it. So today's episode is kind of special because some of the 2020 census results we're going to be covering today, and we're going to be talking about kind of the difference between rural and urban and by population, like which areas are growing more. And off of that, we're going to be talking about like how would the Democrats or the GOP have an advantage now of the census, which it's pretty shocking, but we'll be getting back to that. And then we're also going to be talking about redistricting and gerrymandering. So pretty straightforward episode today. And I think we'll get started on our first bullet point about urban and rural population growth. So we're going to put a map up right now, and this map shows the urban decline in the past from 2010 to 2020.
No, the rural decline.
The rural decline and the urban increase, I'm sorry. And it's shocking to see that the rural areas are getting moved out of in favor of more urban areas, which is shocking but kind of expected. Do you have anything to say about that, Andrew?
Well, I think, as we're going to get to eventually, this probably does slightly favor the Democrats. However, that's not necessarily completely true because Biden didn't win as much of the Hispanic vote as he was expected to win. And that hurt him in places like Florida and Texas. And that's why he almost lost Arizona, because he was expected to win a much larger portion of the Hispanic vote. For example, Hillary Clinton won the counties in Texas around the Mexican border by a very, very large margin because she got so much of the Hispanic vote. That's why she narrowed Florida more than Biden was able to narrow it down, because she won Miami-Dade County, where Miami is in Florida, by such a large margin because of this Hispanic population. And something that we will talk about is how the Hispanic population has grown tremendously. And the black population has also grown by a very large margin. However, the white population hasn't really grown at all. And this is why I believe that the minorities in this country will eventually become the majority, and then the majority, which is the white population, will fall into the minority in the United States. And that's why I think the Democrats do have a slight advantage, is because of the minority population will primarily vote for them. And they also live in these urban areas where Democrats also predominantly do better. And for the urban areas to gain population, that just helps Democrats in general. Of course, this has happened over the last decade, and you can see how Obama won by a healthy margin in 2012 because of this change in demographics and the change in population in different cities and rural areas. However, yes, Trump was able to win in 2016, even with these shifts in population and in the different demographics in the country. And of course, Biden was able to win in 2020, ending the shift in population and demographics. I do believe this will help Democrats going forward, but they really just need to maintain their support among minorities, especially with Hispanics, because of the drop of Hispanic vote for the Democrat Party in 2020. Right now, it's about 9 out of 10 people that are black. This doesn't mean all black people vote Democrat, but 9 out of 10 of them from recent pollings have shown that they do support the Democrat Party over the Republican Party. That might change depending if the Democrat Party changes their point of view and their ideologies and what they think on certain policies. However, right now that is the case. And if this trend continues to increase, where urban areas are gaining population and rural areas are losing population, yes, Democrats are going to really be able to thrive in this environment where the populations that are electing them are going to be in the majority, and then they'll be in the majority in hopefully the Senate, House, and then of course they'll win the presidency with much more ease, unless the Democrats do something really terrible, and then that might happen.
And something to point out as well is the reason that these, as we know from history, that that conservative voters have mostly been in rural areas, and while liberal voters have mostly been in urban, and that's because of the policies because of policies that liberals push out are supporting kind of urban development and kind of more industrial projects, while Republicans kind of favor a more local states' rights sort of deal. And so the reason that we think that these rural people moving to the cities isn't going to affect the city vote is because, number one, obviously, districting, and number two, it's because now that they're moving into the cities, they're going to want policies that help them in the cities, not just policies that help their farm that they're not in back in the country. And so that's the reason that the vote's probably not going to change in the Republicans' favor in the regard of the decline in rural areas.
Right, and just in general, like you said, Republicans, or not necessarily Republicans, but conservatives have traditionally been in these rural areas. That's not always the case. There are some cities that have very conservative people living in them, but predominantly they all live in rural areas, and that's been true basically all of history. Yes, there have been several presidents like Bill Clinton that won a big chunk of the rural vote. However, he was a more moderate candidate. He was able to appeal to the more progressive/liberal voters and also the conservative voters. That's why he was able to win states like Arkansas and Kentucky. And that's still true today. However, the parties have really changed their picture of what they're going to be voting for and what they're going to support. For example, Trump has turned this party into more of a conspiracy theory and more right-wing extremist party, while Democrats have become more progressive, not necessarily all the time, because just like we said a few weeks ago, there are moderates in both parties, not as much as there used to be. However, it's still true today that urban areas are more liberal, and liberal people nowadays are going to be voting for the Democrat Party. And this was why I said before, this is going to help Democrats so much because the urban areas are growing in population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's just, in this regard, it's technically an advantage to liberals and really the Democrats, but it still doesn't mean that Republicans aren't going to have a troll, because a advantage is because back on our next bullet point, we're going to be talking about the reasons behind this. So we're going to be talking about the Democratic or the GOP advantage between Republicans and Democrats, because as we know, the 2020 census, we're actually going to come back to this Democratic and GOP advantage. We're going to go with redistricting and gerrymandering first to kind of weigh these arguments. So as we know in the past, gerrymandering is technically favored, and especially in Republican-held states, it's technically favored Republicans because they are able to gerrymander. And it's not, gerrymandering isn't as common as an occurrence, and we're going to put something up on screen right now, in liberal states, because they just don't really need to do it, because they already have the minority vote. Anyway, gerrymandering as favoring the Republicans, as we know, correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, Florida got one electoral vote in one district.
I think so. I think they have 30 electoral votes now.
Yeah, and along with Texas, did Texas increase?
I think they gained 2.
So sure. Texas increased a bit, and as we know, both of these states are very Republican held, but
they gained 2. Right.
Yeah, and so these states are, now that they're so Republican held, it's kind of weighs out the factor of more people moving to urban areas. And we're also going to put something up on screen right now showing kind of the like, for example, in Texas and Florida, the cities are more democratic than the rural areas, and that's what we were discussing before. So it kind of weighs each other out. But as we both know, especially in these rural areas, that these districts are a big deal. Like, these small little electoral votes or districts can push someone's candidacy ahead, whether it be governorial or presidential. And I feel like that's a very big deal, especially for these Republican-held states like Florida and Texas.
And going back to the idea of the redistricting and the gerrymandering, I'm just going to say states right now. So these are the states that are drawn by an independent commission, meaning that neither party draws the lines. And the states of Washington, California, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Michigan, and Virginia are the states that have an independent commission. Something that you might notice is that the states that are safe Democrat, Washington, California, those are two safe Democrat. Colorado and Virginia are practically safe Democrat. Some people consider them battlegrounds, however, they're basically safe Democrat. And then the only two Republican states that have an independent commission are Idaho and Montana. Fun fact, Idaho only has 2 districts, so it doesn't really matter what they do. Montana is gaining a district, and it doesn't really matter because it's such a safe Republican state. And then, of course, Arizona and Michigan are the 2 battleground states that are drawn by an independent commission. Something you might also notice is that the ones that are drawn by a partisan commission, which is just the legislature. For example, Texas will have 28 districts. That is a lot of districts. All of them will be drawn by Republicans. So even if Democrats win the popular vote in the House, Republicans will most likely have a majority of House seats.
Yeah.
Same thing in Florida. They have 28 districts, I think. Maybe? Oh, no. Texas has 38, sorry. And then Florida has 28. And they will also be drawn by a Republican commission on their House legislature, and of course they have a Republican governor that will approve it. For a state like North Carolina, that's also another battleground state. And they're even more sneaky because they have a Republican legislature, but in North Carolina they have a Democrat governor. So they were thinking, okay, the Democrat governor is going to veto our maps for the redistricting for the state Senate, state House, and then, of course, the congressional districts for the United States House.
But then the governor doesn't have the power to veto it.
Right.
So,
because they've changed the rules.
And so that's just a whole debacle for North Carolina and Connecticut.
And Connecticut,
And
right.
Connecticut, but Connecticut's not as big of a deal because it has a Democrat and
legislature and a Democrat governor.
But it's a big deal in North Carolina where Roy Cooper is the governor, but it still has Republican-controlled legislature. And so it's not really entirely fair. And so that's why North Carolina's kind of been at the center of gerrymandering, which is just awful for the people there. Right.
And also something to point out in North Carolina is Democrats won the popular vote in the House in North Carolina in 2020. I'm afraid we did not win a majority of House seats in North Carolina. Yes, there was mega redistricting done where we actually gained 2 House seats because we gained one in Greensboro and then one in Raleigh. Deborah Ross, I don't remember the other person's name, that won their House district. So we did pick up 2 seats. However, we still did not have a majority of seats, and Republicans still had a majority in North Carolina. However, we did win the popular vote, so that just shows you can get past the courts.
With gerrymandering.
Which they were able to not bypass the courts. And of course, they had to redistrict them again for like the 3rd time in 10 years.
Yeah, and so the only way this is going to change is if legislator in the House reaches a Democratic supermajority, and so that they can add an amendment to the North Carolina Constitution, which allows the governor to have a gubernatorial veto. So that's gubernatorial veto, which will balance things out a bit more, and will also help balance things out so that the districts are more intact.
And another color that you'll see on your map is the purple. And this is the states of Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Tennessee, and Alabama are the states colored in purple. And basically this means is that governor can veto it, but you just need 51 votes that's not true. However many Senate seats, you just need half of them to override that veto. And this is really important for a state like Kentucky. They have a Democrat governor, which is kind of crazy. It is Kentucky. However, they do have, I think, 6 districts. And all of them are Republican except one, because they packed all the Democrat voters in this one district. There is one semi-competitive district, however, it does lean Republican by quite a bit. It was competitive in 2018, not so much in 2020. However, Andy Beshear, the governor there, can't just veto. Well, he can veto this, but his vote doesn't mean anything because Republicans just override that, regardless if they have a simple majority or not in the Senate. Another state is West Virginia. They have a Republican governor, yes. 3 years ago, they had a Democrat governor, Jim Justice. Of course, he did switch parties to the Republicans. That's why they have a Republican governor now. However, he could have vetoed it, but wouldn't matter anything. They do only have 2 districts now because they lost one in the 2020 census, so it doesn't mean too much. However, that is a possibility back before this amendment had been put in place for Republicans to bypass the governor. Before Jim Justice, of course, switched parties. Of course, he did align himself with the Republicans a lot before he switched parties. He was a Democrat, and he endorsed President Trump in his 2016 run before he switched parties. And that's basically how he won in 2016 as a Democrat. Of course, the other 2 places are Indiana, Tennessee, and Alabama. Indiana's governor race has been competitive in the past. 2016, it was very competitive. Actually expected to go to Democrats, but of course it was a semi-red wave in 2016. Tennessee and Alabama are never competitive, so there's not much to say about that. And then yellow is just a politician commission, so it doesn't mean much. And then of course gray is there's only 1 district. And that means they only have 3 electoral votes, 1 congressional districts. Their population is very small. And that's Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Vermont, and Delaware, and Alaska. So, of course, every state...
Alaska doesn't matter.
Alaska doesn't really matter that much. Of course it does on the Senate, but not the House. Because, what's his name? His last name's Young. He's been there for over a century, or over half a century. He's been there a long time.
Over a century. All right.
Over half.
It doesn't matter.
And basically every state does it differently. However, you'll notice how for the large part, certain states do it differently depending on their partisan control.
Yeah.
There are only 2 states with Republicans controlling the legislature where it's an independent commission. And they don't even have any good congressional districts because they only have 2 congressional districts, so it doesn't mean anything. California has 50, they had 53, they're losing 1, so they have 52 congressional districts. That is a lot of congressional districts. I don't know if anybody knew that, but that's a lot of congressional districts. If Democrats had been drawing those lines, we would have a massive majority probably right now. However, it's an independent commission. And the reason we're stressing this so much is our House majority is so narrow. Texas and Florida alone, if the districts that they're going to be gaining go to Republicans, they can take back the House just because of gerrymandering in those 2 states only.
Which is just a really big deal. And we're already on the fence with states like Michigan.
Michigan's really, I think that's split right now.
Michigan,
Wisconsin,
North Carolina.
North Carolina, Pennsylvania's like that. Pennsylvania is another one that had a gerrymandered map. However, they had to redraw the lines because the court struck it down saying this should not be allowed. And of course, Democrats picked up several, this was back in 2018, but they picked up several House seats in Pennsylvania along with the blue wave that happened in 2018. And Wisconsin's another state where we won the House popular vote. However, we just don't win a majority of House seats.
Yeah, so we can confirm that, as what you were saying earlier about the House, that this is a big deal. Like, these 2 states alone, Florida and Texas, could change the tide of the
House of
Representatives incoming in 2022?
2022, because the redistricting should be done by then. If not, they're doing something wrong. Kevin McCarthy will probably be elected speaker just because of this redistricting, no matter what type of wave we have, whether it's a red tsunami, just a slight red wave, possibly a blue wave, but I doubt that.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens, but just because of redistricting, things could really change in the House.
Yeah.
Republicans take the House. Biden can't get anything done his last 2 years in his first term.
Not like he can anyway because of the filibuster. But
yeah, there's not much you can do. He can. he can nominate justices, which there hasn't been any vacancies. However, he can, and there's no filibuster that can block that.
Well, that's besides the point. But
there are a few things he can do, but just in general, like you said, there's not much you can do with the Biden agenda because of the filibuster, and then you have...
We talked about that on a previous episode. Go watch that.
Right.
So, yeah.
So
I think we're going to bring to our final verdict. Do the Democrats or the Republicans probably have an advantage after weighing the urban growth and the redistricting? We're probably going to bring it to, as you were saying earlier, that the Republicans probably have a severe advantage with this.
I think, with gerrymandering.
With gerrymandering, definitely.
In terms of statewide elections that they can't gerrymander.
Yes.
Democrats have a slight majority in some states.
But that doesn't matter in a national election.
It depends on the state. It depends on the state.
Yeah.
Like, for example, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona. Those would matter a lot for statewide races on the national level.
But regardless, on a national level, the Republicans probably have an advantage because of redistricting.
And I will say for statewide...
And electoral growth.
For statewide, if Democrats can hold on to their massive, massive urban vote and their Hispanic and Black and other minority ethnic races vote, then they will, I think, thrive in this environment with the new electorate. And I think they could really improve on their numbers. But like I said, they really need to hammer down on Hispanic votes and try to get them. Biden didn't try as hard in 2020. He lost many because of this fake socialist. Biden's a socialist, while many former Cuban citizens were like, okay, I'm not going to vote for that because we have a communist nation in Cuba.
Yep.
And this fake socialist idea basically lost the Democrat Party a whole lot of votes. And we really, as Democrats, need to bring back that vote. And I think we can hopefully change the tide in local elections, and then we could probably redistrict. Of course, Democrats probably wouldn't do that. They would probably hire an independent commission. So if we took it to the Texas House and Senate legislature, we would probably do an independent commission. But, of course, we don't know. We'll see what Democrats do if we ever do become in the majority in the Senate and the House in Texas. So anyways, if Sam doesn't have anything else, we might end this.
I think we're done.
All right, thank you for watching. Make sure to tune in on Friday.
All right, bye.